Oh my, you, a daughter-in-law, aren't my family. My mother-in-law Susan declared in a restaurant on our vacation. I told you this is a family trip. Of course there's no seat for you here. Did you really think you were a part of this family? You have such a thick skin. Don't you consider yourself a part of us, you hag? You bring shame. You can't even be a servant. I was the one who organized this fall trip, while she was just blubbering about what she wanted. And I was below a servant? Whatever, I don't want to join you guys anyway. I stood up from my seat. I was very much looking forward to this trip, and never imagined it would turn out this way. But then my mother-in-law, who was supposed to enjoy the trip, ended up crying later on. She was about to get bitten by karma in a foreign country. My name is Kathy. I'm an ordinary working wife. My husband Mike and I dated in university. And it's been 5 years since we got married right after our graduation. We've been together for about 9 years, including our university years. When you are with someone for that long, you start seeing the faults of the other. It wasn't like we were going through a rough patch, but we definitely lost passion for each other. At the beginning of our relationship, Mike always tried to be courteous. After marriage, he considered chores as women's jobs. He repeated shower, dinner, and sleep on weekdays after returning from work, and he lounged around, playing games all day on weekends. I had a job as well, so I wanted him to be more helpful. We often had arguments over the subject at the beginning of our marriage. After a while, I had given up. I'd even come to believe that it was less efficient to have poor help. I supposed all the couples were more or less like us. The world may have been doing its best to promote gender equality, but if you looked at it on a family level, I doubted that such a thing was going to permeate for decades to come. Anyway, Mike's laziness was only a minor problem. There was a much bigger issue. Susan, my mother-in-law. She didn't live with us, but often called and visited us at home. If she meant to spend quality time with us, it would have been appreciated, but not even once she tried. She came for only one reason: to ask me to do some bothersome tasks for her. For example, government-related procedures, arranging trips that I wasn't going, and an invitation to a thorough cleaning day at her house. I had to clean her AC, bathroom, kitchen, and so on. I wasn't there to help, but was made to do everything by myself. In addition to this, I signed up for her phone, an internet provider, and issued a credit card in my name. Other than that, I was used as her driver, and as a nurse to her late mother when it was needed. Fortunately, I wasn't bothered during my work hours, but she didn't hesitate to disturb my private time with some sort of requests. Mike once told me that she was from an affluent family. When she was small, her family business bloomed, and they lived on a large property. She had a nanny who took care of all her needs. And then the business faltered with a change of trends. After the downsizing of the business, the family lived an ordinary life. But she reputedly kept a selfish habit from childhood. It didn't really matter how she became to be herself. Mike should have stood on his feet and made her stop harassing me, but he had never shown a sign of it. Maybe it was my fault for letting her be, just to keep peace in the family. In any case, I was not a servant. It would have been better if I had received even a single word of gratitude, but I only got that in the beginning. She's gotten used to ordering me around with a snap of the fingers, and even complained if something didn't go the way she wanted. It got nothing to do with me if she didn't like the weather on her trip I organized. She also had a stingy side, and never initiated to pay her credit card and phone bills unless I asked her. I didn't see her every day, so when I was busy with my life, I sometimes put off urging her, and then eventually forgot about it. I couldn't tell you how much money I had sponsored her. I used to twist my brain to find a way to make her stop asking me without upsetting her. Despite my feelings, Susan, as usual, asked me for a favor one day. "Hi, Kathy. I want to go on a family trip overseas. Please organize it." As soon as I answered the phone, she started with her request. She gave me the detail as follows. The destination was Barcelona. The length of the trip was 1 week, and the number of packs was 5. Flights must be booked in business class, and a specific restaurant must be reserved. Other than that, she said, everything else was left to my ability. How self-serving. I didn't even know if I was able to take a week off from my work. Even if I did, what about Mike? You know, it's a bit last minute. I don't know if Mike and I can get days off from work. To which she replied with totally unexpected comments. Why should you get approval for a family trip from your company? Mike's okay with it anyway. You should prioritize your family over your job in the first place. I pity your sensibility. She hung up on me. What an imposition. It was the biggest hassle ever. If I didn't follow through on the plan, I shuddered to think how she would treat me in the future. So far, her bullying had been done insidiously in the form of requests, but I wondered if he was to become more blatant. I had no choice but to make travel arrangements, no matter how much I was annoyed. And for once, it wasn't all bad. I was actually looking forward to Barcelona too. It was the first time for me to go abroad on vacation. How could I not be excited? I then asked my boss if I could take some time off. Although he was reluctant, he gave me an okay, because it was an off-peak season. I surveyed tourist attractions meticulously and reserved our flights, hotel, and the restaurant Susan wanted to go to. I was confident that she would not complain. And then the day of our trip arrived. There was Susan, her husband John, his sister Anne, Mike, and me, the 5 of us. I've spoken to Anne a bit before, but in terms of relationship value, it's almost as if we've never met before. Nevertheless, I was made to carry Susan and Anne's luggage under Susan's direction, and I struggled to keep up with the group. It was too difficult to carry a week's worth of luggage for 3 people, including my own. My hands were full, and I couldn't even wipe the sweat from my forehead due to the hard labor. I couldn't resist calling out to Mike. "Hey, help me out here. Take your mom or aunt's luggage." He gave me a displeased expression, but held out his hands to me. Just when I was about to pass one of the luggage to him, Susan called out to Mike from ahead of us. "Mike, don't you take that. This is a family trip, which means we don't have to do any work. You don't need to help her. You should give ears to her instead." It sounded like I wasn't a family member. I glanced at John and Anne, who quickly looked away. They probably felt bad for me, but didn't want to intervene and upset Susan. As for Mike, he happily asked, "Really? You take my suitcase? Do I look like I'm capable?" I raised my voice, which attracted the eyes of strangers around us. Susan remarked, "How embarrassing," and laughed. Feeling ashamed, I kept my face down and carried the luggage. In a short while, I was freed from being a porter after the check-in. Our seat class was business as Susan wished. It was 1-to-1 seat configuration, and the individual seats looked quite roomy. Then I suddenly became concerned about the cost of the trip, hoping they were going to pay for their parts. It was too late to worry about it at the point, so I discarded the thought. The sitting order was Susan and Anne, Mike and John, and myself with a stranger, using the 2 rows in the center. It was inevitable for an odd number of people, but there was no consultation. As a matter of course, I was alone. Although I was at ease on the plane, without having Susan ask me to do something. Mike fell asleep as soon as he sat down, and did not seem to care about me. So I had a lonely 10 hours flight to Barcelona with hardly anyone to talk to. And then we safely arrived at El Prat Airport. When I got off the plane, my mood was lifted by the unfamiliar scent of the air in a foreign place, and I forgot all about my lonely flight. Such excitement was short-lived as we picked up our luggage, and once again, I had to carry the ones for Susan and Anne. I kept calm and endured in silence. It was better than fighting on our first day and having the worst trip ever. With such a thought on my mind, we arrived at the restaurant Susan requested. I couldn't figure out why we didn't leave our luggage at the hotel first, and then headed out. By all accounts, it was easier that way. Anyway, I entered the restaurant happily, thinking I would be released from the porter job for a while. Then I saw Susan waving her hand to someone. I followed her gaze and saw a man about the same age as her waving back. I had no idea who he was, and wondered if he was a local. He was sitting at the table I had reserved. Why was a stranger sitting there? Unaware of my confusion, Susan walked toward him. "How have you been, Tom? It's been a long time." Tom? I had heard the name before. I went up to him and introduced myself. "I'm Kathy, wife of Mike. Nice meeting you." When we exchanged a kiss on the cheeks, he looked a little puzzled, then turned a friendly smile on his face and said, "I'm Tom, brother of Susan. I've been living here for a long time, so we've never met before. I might have made you feel uncomfortable by showing up suddenly, but we're a family now, so don't be shy." It seemed like he was a kind person, unlike Susan. That said, there was one problem. If Tom was joining us, the number of reservations should have been changed. Susan was so careless as to not let me know ahead of time. "Susan, if you knew Tom was joining us, you should have told me in advance. I don't think there's a problem to add one more seat here, but I don't know about the other places." She looked puzzled for a moment. "Why do you need to change the number?" she innocently asked. I didn't think I said something strange. I worried that she was showing a symptom of dementia. Because there are you, John, Tom, Anne, Mike, and me, the 6 of us. Before I could say anything else, Susan made a face that said, "Got it." You see, we don't need to change them. We got enough seats. I told you this is a family trip. Of course there's no seat for you here. Did you really think you were a part of this family? You have such thick skin. Don't you consider yourself part of us, you hag? You bring us shame. You're just a guide. You can't even be a servant. What? Did she just say I wasn't her family? I had done everything she asked me to do. Even though this trip was arranged all by me, I was still seen as less than a servant. Moreover, Mike seemed to not care, even though his wife was degraded in public. Hey Mike, can you back me up? We are married, but are we not a family? He frowned as if to say he didn't want to be involved in this. Of course, you and I are our family, but the relationship between you and my mom isn't really so. And I'm told that you're just a guide on this trip. I thought you knew and came along. Are you joking me? He was stunned by an enraged shout, and then mumbled, "Don't get me involved." Other diners around us stared at me, just as the passengers in the airport did. But I wasn't ashamed this time. I was more hurt to be mistreated to this extent. Susan opened her mouth, not bothered that I was struggling to hold my tears back. "Now that you know, get to your duty. Your job is to find a taxi and take all our luggage to the hotel, and then come get us around the time we finish our meal. You can do whatever you like in between." She acted indifferently as usual, and told me as if it were right and natural to do so. I was beyond outraged. I glared at Susan, who treated me like a slave, and Mike, John, and Anne, who couldn't think for themselves, and neither agreed nor denied it. "I'm leaving. I don't care about you guys. You have Tom, who lives here, so you can manage without me." I decided to walk away from them at this point. Then Susan yelled at my back, "Wait a minute. What about our luggage? At least take them to the hotel. Why do you think I let you come along?" I ignored her and grabbed a taxi to the airport. I booked a return flight on the way there. While I was waiting for my flight, I kept crying from the devastation and despair that Mike or people didn't see me as a family member. I might have made other passengers around me uneasy, but my heart was so torn to shreds that I couldn't care less. Then my phone started ringing. I wasn't in no mood to talk to anyone, so I didn't check who was calling. But the phone didn't stop ringing for a long time. When I finally picked up, it was Mike. I thought maybe he wanted to apologize. No, it couldn't have been. "Hey, hon, can you come back ASAP? Tom got upset with my mom and left, and we got kicked out of the restaurant. We don't know what to do now. Family is supposed to help each other, right? So please." Apparently, Tom was a decent man, as I expected him to be. I asked him to elaborate. Tom didn't like Susan and Mike's attitude toward me. "I'm disgusted. I don't want to spend any more time with you people." He yelled at them and left the restaurant. In addition, the waiter kicked them out for being a nuisance and creating a scene. And they were at a loss for what to do next. Now, how did we ever get from the airport to the restaurant? That was because I interacted with locals in Spanish. I had never taken a vacation overseas, but I often had business trips to Spanish-speaking countries. Therefore, I learned conversational level through study and experience. When things went rough, they wanted me as a family member. My sorrow and despair evaporated in thin air. Karma caught up with them. I reluctantly decided to tell him the location of the hotel, in Spanish. The name of the hotel is ABC, located about 20 minutes from the restaurant by taxi. What? What are you saying? I don't understand. Speak English. I'm telling you nicely. It's your fault that you guys didn't do any prep work in the first place, you know. You guys said I wasn't a family member. So I don't care what happens to you. You're not my family anyway. While I was speaking, Mike hysterically screamed nonsense at me. Then Susan took over the phone. Kathy, Mike is trying hard, but why are you not helping him? A wife is supposed to be devoted to her husband. Come back. Fulfill your duty, you useless hag. She was out of her head. Even though we spoke the same language, the conversation was not going to happen. I knew it well, and it was time for my boarding, so I wasn't gonna waste any time on her. Get lost, I said in Spanish, and hung up on her. Then I immediately started the process to cut off her cell phone and credit card. A sequel to the story. Susan and company had wandered around in the city of Barcelona until they met a kind English speaker who helped them with scheduling the flight. But during that time, they were troubled by vicious rip-offs and pickpocketing. Because of that, the cash they had brought with them was almost gone. I was so glad I had cancelled Susan's credit card. I left my wedding ring and the contact detail of my divorce lawyer in the house I lived with Mike. I searched for a seasoned divorce lawyer as soon as I returned. I was determined to fight with Mike, but he easily agreed to the term. He not only lost a lot of money during the trip, but he had resigned from work. So he had no financial means to hire a lawyer for himself. When Susan approached him about the trip, "You can find a job once you're back. Even if you can't have Kathy, you can be a stay-at-home husband. A family trip is more important." He had been talked into it. Unbelievably moronic, right? Anyway, I quickly became a free woman thanks to this. Mike lost most of his assets due to alimony and property division, and he's now working like a horse. Susan heavily relied on me for various procedures, so she has no clue what to do with them now. She fell behind or failed to pay credit cards and taxes, and her life is starting to fall apart. They should sink to the bottom at once.